Joe Olacino, and I'm an account executive with CCSI, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's CCSI's Ransomware Prevention webinar. Today, Rob Villano of CCSI, a cybersecurity systems engineer, will be presenting. For those of you not familiar with CCSI, we've been in business since 1974. Our core competencies consist of several technology silos: infrastructure, which incorporates the data center, IPT, wireless, disaster recovery, virtualization, video surveillance, and access control; security, which you'll be hearing more about today, remote workforce vulnerabilities, real-time breach detection, risk assessments, pen and vulnerability testing, DDoS solutions, secure mail, and endpoint prevention. We also offer 24/7 application monitoring services, and we're also a managed service provider and managed security provider. And we provide customized SLA hardware maintenance offerings. At the conclusion of today's webinar, there will be a Q&A session. So for anyone who has questions, please message them to the host, Catherine Irizarry of CCSI, in the WebEx chat box. And at this time, I'd like to take this opportunity and introduce you to Rob Villano of CCSI.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everyone, to CCSI's ransomware webinar today. Thank you for joining. My name is Robert Villano. I'm the pre-sales cybersecurity manager here at CCSI. First and foremost, I'm a data privacy advocate. I have specialized during my career of 10 years in cybersecurity, safeguarding the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of highly sensitive data. I've done so in very highly regulated environments, utilizing security architecture review and executing various assessment methodologies for organizations who are in these highly regulated environments to achieve compliance. I hold multiple security certifications, and I enjoy advising and collaborating with our clients to inform them of information security best practices, our cybersecurity solutions, and risk assessment remediation strategies. For all here on the call, you can always reach me at rvillano@cccsinet.com. So as we begin, what is ransomware? Well, the strict definition is that it's a specific or malicious type of malware that denies access to your system and ultimately resolves itself in a demand for payment to restore your access. It does so, these criminal syndicates do so by way of asking for a cryptocurrency, a credit card, or even an untraceable gift card. Important thing to note, though, is that payment does not always ensure restoring access to your system. There are studies out there that show less than 50% of folks who pay a ransom are able to receive full access to their system again. It's also important to note that victims who do pay are often frequently targeted again. And as this type of infection goes, one infection can spread throughout an organization. We'll take a look at these in more detail as we go through the presentation. So how does ransomware work, infect, and spread? It begins by an attacker or a threat vector, right? So when these threat actors can pose these types of threats, such as phishing emails, malicious attachments, or even drive-by downloading, which is, typically a user goes to a website and unbeknownst to he or she, software is being downloaded to their machine. It's often associated with a malicious website. And so it transposes to a ransomware scenario where your computer or system is then locked, your network access is blocked, and your files are inaccessible. Typically, what you'll find is that your files have an extension that is unknown, and it's typically letters and typically known to the threat actor or criminal syndicate. It ends with extortion, or the attackers requesting some sort of ransom to decrypt your system. And in these days, what's even more ominous is that there's this notion of double extortion, where they threaten to destroy the encryption key and or release sensitive data to the public. And it's all in an effort to get you to act more swiftly to make the payment that they're requesting. So what are the common ransomware tactics? As I mentioned earlier, it typically starts with a phishing email. They'll harvest your credentials, compromise your system, and then deliver the ransomware. We're also seeing a lot of perimeter defense misconfigurations. And so, two of them in particular, which have been known weaknesses from a Microsoft perspective, is what's called RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. Many system admins use it to administer and maintain their systems. And also server message block, which is a technology offered by Microsoft for sharing of information within their network services. They typically scan for these types of vulnerable services at the perimeter. They exploit an unpatched service. And again, they harvest credentials, gain access, and deliver their ransomware. Fortunately, there are countermeasures. Some that we'll look at in further detail are listed here. One of the most important ones, though, is penetration testing. Good penetration testers use tools to understand the weaknesses at the perimeter. Typically, what's found is network misconfigurations, meaning vulnerable services are exposed to the internet, either by port or service itself. Lack of patching, network access control is another good countermeasure. These resolve themselves with better protection of your overall enterprise system, all of these countermeasures, and we'll look at them in a bit more detail as we go through the presentation. So here are some of the targeted organizations, and it really runs the gamut. It can go from small to medium-sized businesses. And what happens there is they may attack a larger parent organization or the supply chain. K through 12 school districts, especially last year, were really a focus of malware. Healthcare is always an industry which has ransomware attacks. Unfortunately, healthcare data is very, very sensitive information and garners a great deal of resources or monies on the dark web. And so there's the motivation there. Law firms, as you can imagine, have all sorts of highly sensitive personal and financial information, and clearly financial institutions as well. As I mentioned, the common themes are access to sensitive data, where financial and reputational damage is at stake, creating a sense of urgency to make a ransom payment. Some of the impacted organizations over the last 3 or 4 years, it runs the gamut. It really does. It's across all industries. And so you can see the automotive industry with high-profile victims, Honda and Nissan, to the National Health System in the UK on the left side of the chart. That was a rather noteworthy one, the primary healthcare system in the UK. To smaller companies such as Johnson Community School District. It just runs the gamut. It seems as if no one is safe. If you have sensitive data, you're in that bullseye. Even FedEx, a behemoth of that size, had a run-in with ransomware. And so I wanted to take the time to take a look at a recent attack, I think still in our consciousness. Earlier this month, the Colonial pipeline attack took place with ransomware. I wanted to go over some of the facts and tactics. And so Colonial is the largest pipeline in America, and the image on the left side of the screen depicts that. I was rather surprised when learning about this. It controls 45% of the gasoline and oil on the East Coast. So it's a obviously a strategic resource, and one that falls into the national security consciousness. Colonial Pipeline itself produces $15 billion of annual revenue, so they're really a large organization. The outage was a 6-day outage, which caused supply chain disruptions, higher gas prices, limiting the resource itself. It was conducted or infiltrated by a criminal gang called DarkSide, and they were responsible. This is actually a ransomware as a service platform, believe it or not. These criminal syndicates actually recruit cyber criminals to infect companies and then carry out these notorious negotiations of ransom. They oftentimes rely on double extortion for payment. This is an actual criminal enterprise that is focused on, obviously collecting dollars, major dollars. In this case, the Department of Justice took note. They have created a task force to address the root causes of ransomware as a matter of national security. The Biden administration is really focused on this. There's been a number of high-profile cases, this being one. And so a task force is now in place to vet out what these root causes are and how better the United States can adjust to these types of events. And so the end result of this episode was a $5 million ransom paid within hours after the attack. That wasn't publicized, but that actually took place. Colonial Pipeline was under heavy pressure to do so for obvious reasons. The nation's eastern corridor was subject to less energy than needed. And so they were under incredible pressure to pay the ransom, and they did. Some of the tactics that were involved on the left side of the screen was access through phishing and exploiting remote access accounts and systems, i.e. remote desktop protocol. We mentioned it earlier. I can't say it enough. I've seen it, and this has been in most ransomware attacks where RDP is one of the vectors used. And so, this particular service or function provided by Microsoft needs to be really well understood in your environments and restricted certainly from outside access or public access. The way these attackers remained private or underneath the radar, if you will, was by using what's called the onion router, or really Tor for command and control. Tor has the capability of obfuscating the source IP of the perpetrator, and so it does so by a way of a series of exit nodes throughout their network. And so it's a way of obfuscating who you really are and keeping things quiet. It was reported that these folks, DarkSide, used Tor extensively for command and control while keeping it quiet. And so it's interesting, but ransomware is not an unstoppable force. It is preventable, and we're going to take you through some of the prevention techniques to prevent against this rather important malware and infection that literally can stop a business from running. And so first and foremost, here at CCSI, we believe in NIST CSF. It's our strategic focus. NIST CSF, Cybersecurity Framework, is a framework used to prevent against infection or outside or external attacks. It begins with the framework which talks about these 5 areas: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so within those areas are these types of prevention techniques, if you will, and technologies, ways of, providing for a defense in depth posture for your environments. And so to begin with, the identify phase is, I mentioned it briefly earlier, but a penetration test. And so there, what you can find are misconfigurations which make you subject to potential exploits on your perimeter. And that's where these threat actors can really seek to get into your environments. And so a good penetration test uses tools such as Metasploit or other tools to basically understand where you're weak, what kinds of services are currently exposed, what ports are exposed, what misconfigurations within your application or database suite exist. Those kinds of things where it may be unbeknownst to you, but these types of things can be determined with a good pen test. It also is necessary to provide for a good vulnerability management exercise where you're understanding the weaknesses internally as well. And so vulnerability analysis is key and important to prevent against misconfigurations and weaknesses so that they won't be exploited. It's a great idea to continue in the identify phase with privileged access understanding. So we all are, busy in our work, and we're extending access to folks, and folks move around within an organization or leave an organization. What typically gets left behind, because we're busy, is access, and it's even worse if it's privileged access. It's recommended to do a recertification of access at least once a year, preferably twice. There are tools out there, and CCSI can make you aware of these tools of understanding who has access to what and why, and recertification could be done quite easily. So happy to have those discussions with you. In the protect phase, security awareness is really, really important. It's important because any defense in depth strategy relies on it. We need to better inform our user base, all of our employees, of what not to do and what types of behaviors are required and expected. There are wonderful tools out there to test people's awareness of certain types of attacks, certain types of email threats. It's that muscle memory that we can develop for our constituency that really helps us to prevent against these types of infections. A good patch management strategy is always necessary. It goes along with vulnerability management. So one is the identification, patching is the protection mechanism, and the remediation methodology behind that. A good patch cadence is vitally important to ensure your defenses. As we move along to the detect area, artificial intelligence has the benefit and promises to understand those areas within an environment or a network where suspicious or anomalous behavior is taking place. And so it's important to understand that, because not everything can be found immediately, but AI, especially as it learns the natural behaviors of an environment, can certainly understand and detect unnatural or anomalous behaviors, and an important part of an overall security strategy within an enterprise. Phishing detection, which is really email security, is an important component of that as well, given the fact that many infections begin with an email scenario or a phishing attack, particularly spear phishing, to important people within the organization, a vice president, a CIO, a CTO, high-level officials, because clearly they're the decision makers in many of our organizations. And finally, in the detect phase, or I should say the respond phase, is EDR. It's endpoint detection and response. It's got a component of both detection and response. And so EDR, managed endpoints, is the secret sauce behind protecting your environments. It does so in a way where it can respond as well by shutting off a service, depending on your runbook, or a runbook that CCSI can help set up for you. And it is also monitored. These endpoints are 24/7 monitored. We have a system called Threat Protect that we'll speak about later, but 24/7 monitoring is key and very important part of an overall defense in depth strategy. Finally, this entire framework relies upon the recovery component, and there we're looking at backups and disaster recovery as a service. The key component here is if you know you have a backup that's been tested, validated, and you can get back your data and your systems, you have an ACE card, okay, in your pocket, because you know you can get back up and running in a certain amount of time as defined by your security and incident response plan. And so there, it's important to have solutions, and CCSI offers them, for successfully testing your backups, preventing against ransomware and infections, and as well as for those organizations that have resources to allow for a disaster recovery as a service mechanism. There are wonderful cloud services now that allow you to run your business in the cloud while you're rebuilding your production networks. Years ago, you'd have to have an alternative data center, which is very costly, versus both from a physical perspective as well as an equipment perspective. Now, there are cloud services which allow for operating expense where you can rebuild your production environments, okay, while still running your business. So what are the prevention techniques or types of things that we like to call here at CCSI the Elite 11 techniques of preventing against ransomware? So here they are. And so we have a checklist that's more thorough than this. It's actually 2 pages. It's a wonderful resource. I would encourage everyone to download it. And it allows for a complete understanding on some of the things that you want to do to prevent against these kinds of infections. But first and foremost, vulnerability and risk management assessments are vitally important. Pen tests, as mentioned. To contain outbreaks, you certainly want to use VLANs, strong authentication through multi-factor and VPNs, and limiting access to your network through role-based access control is really important. We talked about the security awareness programs. We talked about patch. We impress upon all of our clients, exercise good judgment, especially with email. And anti-ransomware endpoint software, which CCSI offers a number of solutions in that regard, is key to protecting your networks, and while continuously monitoring those endpoints and providing for regular backups and testing their validity, as well as disaster recovery as a service, all amount to and contribute to a defense in-depth strategy and a complete and thorough prevention scenario against ransomware. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time to focus on backup and recovery, since it's a really important infection or prevention vector for ransomware. And so to ensure recovery from a ransomware attack, you really want to conduct regular backups. And the key to this is to test the recoverability. How long does it take to get your data back? How long does it take to get a system back? Is this within your risk tolerance? Is it within your what's called recovery time objective or recovery point objective for your business continuity plans? These are the questions to ask and vitally important for an overall strategy against a disaster. And so the rule of thumb is 3210. And what that refers to is you want to have 3 different copies of your data and from 2 different media. Preferably an offsite copy, one that is air-gapped or with immutable storage, and we'll talk about that in a minute, with 0 errors after backup testing. Again, I focus on the testing because it's, vitally important. When you want to restore something, clearly you want to know that that backup is valid and you have the integrity of your data available. And so here are the benefits of immutable storage, right? So you prevent against data deletion or modification from storage. Immutable means it's write once, read many. And so it's hardware agnostic, which is a really good feature these days because there's various hardware technologies out there. And you can leverage immutable data backup from valid source data for restoration. And so, there are services out there, particularly AWS S3 object storage, where, this, simple storage service allows for immutable storage where it really protects against the outbreak of ransomware. So one of the key questions that comes up over and over again, and there's been some discussion and even debate on this, is should you pay the ransom, right? First and foremost, if you look at CISA, the cybersecurity infrastructure and system architecture, the FBI says they do not advocate paying a ransom, right? And so few organizations publicly admit to paying these ransoms, but threat actors typically publicize the fact of who does pay on the dark web. And it's been shown and seen that there's more of a propensity to attack again. And so, as I mentioned earlier, paying a ransom doesn't guarantee recovery. And as I mentioned earlier, less than half of ransomware victims are able to successfully restore their systems. Little known facts, but they are. And so it's not like these criminals give you a guarantee or a warranty card, if you will. So it's something to consider. We do understand the fact that people pay these ransoms for obvious reasons. It often comes down to a business decision, but there are caveats and risks associated with doing so. So we thought to highlight those here. So I'd like to point out for a moment our cybersecurity strategy. We created a security wheel here at CCSI, and it's based on the NIST CSF framework of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And so these are the services in our strategy for providing to our customers. At the heart of the strategy is what we call our threat protect managed security operations, where for 24/7, we will monitor your endpoints here in Bohemia, New York, with certified IT professionals. And so those managed endpoints you protect against all types of different attacks, most notably malware and ransomware. They do so utilizing AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And so our seasoned analysts will notify you upon alerts that need to be actioned. And so along with that, we also are involved with patch management, vulnerability management, as well as security assessments and tabletop exercises as well. We do our assessments based on CIS, Center for Internet Security, their top 20 security risk assessments and their top 20 risk vectors, if you will. And so we also have a security awareness set of products where we'll be involved in better informing your employees for best practices and what they should be doing from a behavioral standpoint, all in an effort to provide for a thorough cybersecurity strategy and defense in depth approach. We're happy to get involved in any of these conversations and technologies and solutions with you, filling in the gaps with regard to your overall strategy. As I mentioned, security operations, our SOC, is located here in Bohemia. It is SOC 2 Type 2 certified for the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of your data. We have certified IT professionals across quite a few disciplines. And so AICPA offers that SOC Type 2 certification. So we'd also like to make you aware of completing today our survey for a chance to win our $25 Starbucks gift card. Surveys will be emailed to you later today. We encourage you to provide for any feedback you have with regard to today's webinar and any future webinars or topics that you're interested in the cybersecurity space. We welcome that feedback. That concludes today's discussion. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, so right now we're going to start the Q&A portion. So you can continue setting questions privately to me or the public chat room. I'll answer them all. The first one I wanted to ask you that came in, what are the most common attack vectors used in ransomware?
I think we had discussed a few of those, but most recently and over the last year, at least couple of years, what we've been seeing is exposure to RDP, right? So remote desktop protocol is a way of administering environments or systems over the internet using that software from Microsoft. It's a known vulnerable service. These ports and servers should not be exposed on the internet. And folks, what they're trying to do is get in via RDP, brute forcing stolen credentials, which can be purchased on the dark web, gaining access to the system, and then ultimately, wreaking havoc by, installing ransomware, deleting backups, disabling even antivirus software, and overall changing configuration settings and all types of things that render an environment, unavailable, if you will. So.
Great, thanks. Another question we got in was, why did Colonial refuse to use the key? In the end, they relied solely on restores instead of decryption.
Not sure the question, but I'll give you a couple things happened there, right? So Colonial used a tool that was ultimately provided by these perpetrators, and were able to restore data, albeit slowly. And so they were able to get back up and running. They shut down their systems because they weren't confident of the validity and integrity of them. And so they began a negotiation with DarkSide, which is the criminal syndicate. And so over the course of time, there was a great deal of pressure, and they ultimately, submitted to the $5 million ransom to get their systems back. But it did take quite a while.
Okay, and then another question was, what is recommended to have on every desktop, laptop to capture memory, etc., if an endpoint is compromised?
There are dumps that one could use to capture memory on a system, memory dumps, and so there, folks have been and have provided for memory dumps, securing them along the way. There are other tools to ultimately use to do this with, forensic tools. There are companies that oftentimes hire these forensic companies to ensure that they capture relevant memory for any action within a court of law. I know Metasploit, and there's other tools that are used for these kinds of things. But yeah, certainly it's an important part of an overall, capture mechanism and evidence mechanism for any legal holes that may exist if a company chose to go in that direction.
Great. Another question we got in was, how do you protect my backups? Is it possible to have a safe copy?
It is. There's a couple of ways of having safe copies. I assume against ransomware is what the question alludes to, but offline copies, as we mentioned earlier, multiple media copies. You can also use immutable storage, as we mentioned, in the cloud, providing for a safe copy. So there are ways of doing it. It needs a little bit more, perhaps manual labor, manual intervention, but it is possible and necessary if you're going to provide for data integrity, if you will.
Great. Seems like the same question came in, saying there seems to be contention between isolating suspected endpoints and getting as much forensics and chain control on evidence. I don't know if there's anything more in depth you want to.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Isolation, I'm not sure if I brought it up earlier, but certainly isolating your network using VLAN technology to isolate sensitive data, defining where your data is, your sensitive data is located, and providing for network isolation to contain what's called lateral movement within an attack is really, really important. And so, as well as having a well-tested security incident response plan, right? So it's really important to have these things in place to understand how your organization will react under pressure, given a certain scenario that takes place within an infection, whether it's ransomware or malware or any type of security incident. So yeah, I would agree with that, network isolation plays a key role within protecting in a ransomware scenario.
Sounds good, thank you. We just got another one in. Do you have a sample of a playbook we can use after ransomware hits?
We probably could come up with a generic one, but playbooks are oftentimes specific to your environment, right? So do this if this, then that, right? So that's typically how they work. And you're looking to shut off a service if, clearly there's an indicator of compromise or an indicator of attack. But yeah, we could, if you'd like to reach out to me, I'm not sure who asked that. I'd love to have a conversation with you and go through one and get you something that, that would be suitable for what it is you're looking to do.
Yeah, we can contact them after. Another question that came in was, what are the best cybersecurity investments to prevent against a ransomware attack and its impact?
Well, yeah, I think some of the best return on investment, it clearly comes from, EDR, endpoint detection response, email security, multi-factor authentication, right? We talked about, backup and recovery technologies and techniques, air-gapped or immutable storage. CCSI offers solutions in this space, which are really valuable. And the last one I would offer is really isolating your users and restricting what access they have using a technique called role-based access control. All this leads to a robust strategy against attack vectors and bad actors, if you will.
Great. And then the last question we got in, unless we get any ones while I'm reading this, is what design principles are important for containing an outbreak?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I think I may have mentioned a few things earlier, but you really, to contain an outbreak, an incident, and it doesn't always have to be, ransomware. It could be just malware, right? A malware breakout. You want to isolate your networks, right? So flat networks are really problematic because there's very little way of containing an outbreak, right? So you want to understand that, through VLANs and isolating your network traffic, that you understand what's on your specific VLANs, what's important to you from a data perspective, what's important to you from an information asset perspective, what's important from an organizational value perspective, right? So this logical separation of networks and logical separation of data is really important. And as I mentioned earlier, a really important area is to have a valid and well-tested security incident response plan so that everyone knows what they are to do given an outbreak. And that sort of understanding and comfort level goes a long way to containing, an infection.
Great, thanks, Rob. I think that's the end of our questions.
Thank you, Kat.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. And in closing, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Your account managers will be following up to discuss next steps. And a very critical point, Rob had mentioned this early on one of his slides. So we're going to be sending out a survey. We really, truly, greatly appreciate your feedback. I do a lot of these, and I got to say, we had a big turnout for today's event and a lot of questions. I don't think we've ever had, I've ever had so many questions before one of my webinars. So I know the interest is there. A lot of you are my customers. Some of you are using Threat Protect or components of Threat Protect. So I know this is a hot topic. And you know, you guys help us letting us know what you want to hear about, you know, what's coming up in the future. So it literally takes 2 minutes to fill out the survey. It goes a long way, and we have open ears and we're listening to what, you know, you want to hear about upcoming. And like Rob said too, if some of you have like a specific topic or just a small area of interest you want to hear more about, you know, feel free to ping Rob, ping your account manager. We're here to assist you. So again, once CCSI receives your completed survey, which literally takes like 2 minutes, you'll be entered into a raffle to win a $25 Starbucks gift card. So in the next few days, we will announce the winner and send out the gift card. So please, please, please keep an eye out for the survey, and it will be sent out later today. So in closing, thank you again. Appreciate everyone's time, and have a great day, and we'll keep you all posted on future events related to security and non-security technology issues and items. Thanks again, everyone. Have a fantastic day.